Today, after years of searching, maritime experts confirm the resting place of James Cook's ship, the Endeavour.
It's arguably one of the most important vessels in Australia's maritime history.
Also, pressure mounts on the government to help the struggling aged care sector. COVID vaccine boosters given the green light for 16 and 17-year-olds. And reopening to the world, New Zealand's 5-stage plan to lift border restrictions. Hello and welcome to ABC News. I'm Ros Childs. Maritime experts have confirmed the final resting place of Captain James Cook's ship, the Endeavour, after 22 years of searching. Reporter Amy Greenbank has the details from Sydney.
This is one of the greatest maritime mysteries now solved. The wreckage, which has been discovered at the bottom of Newport Harbour in Rhode Island in the United States, was noted by divers some time ago, but it's taken 22 years of detailed analysis to get to the point where Australian divers say they are confident this is where Captain Cook's Endeavour ship lays. However, Rhode Island authorities say they are yet to do so. This is a significant find because this was the ship that mapped the east coast of New South Wales in 1770.
It's arguably one of the most important vessels in Australia's maritime history. And yes, the Australian National Maritime Museum, together with our partners RIMAP, have found the wreck of Cook's Endeavour.
So, Amy, what's going to happen with the site now?
Well, only 15% of the site remains, and that's because it's been so badly eroded over the years. But Australian experts say they'll be working with Rhode Island authorities to try and preserve and protect what remains of the site. The ultimate goal is to bring or to borrow small pieces of it to display here at the Maritime Museum in Sydney. As you can see behind me, there is a replica of the Endeavour tied up here in Darling Harbour. They're hoping to have some real pieces of the ship to display in the near future, but acknowledge as well this is a difficult discovery for many, particularly for Indigenous Australians, being such a painful part of Australia's history.
Amy, thank you. Pressure is growing on the federal government to do more to help the aged care sector, with providers estimating that a quarter of all shifts are going unfilled. A report from Aged and Community Services Australia is sounding the alarm as the deadly Omicron wave continues to spread through nursing homes. Political reporter Noor Haydar has more from Parliament House in Canberra.
The Chief Medical Officer, Paul Kelly, says that he is expecting there will be more deaths within the aged care sector in the coming weeks. Already in the month of January, there were 499 COVID deaths within aged care facilities across Australia, according to the sector. That's more than all of the deaths within the industry in the entirety of the year 2021. Now, aged care providers are pleading with the federal government for additional support. They estimate that a quarter of shifts, that's equivalent to 140,000 shifts per week, are going unstaffed. The Australian Aged Care Collaboration Organisation, that's a group of 6 peak aged care bodies, including Anglicare, Baptist Care and Uniting Care. They make up 70% of Australia's aged care service providers. They're pleading for additional help from the government as they face these ongoing workforce shortages. And they've also criticised the federal government's aged care bonus payments that were announced earlier this week. The government made that announcement to try and incentivise aged care workers to remain within the workforce. Now, this group is also calling on the government to implement a number of measures, including more appropriate payments for aged care workers in recognition of the additional work and risks they face during COVID-19. The group also says there needs to be better surge workforce arrangements to deal both with this outbreak outbreak, but also future outbreaks in the months to come. And they say more reliable supplies of rapid antigen tests and PPE equipment is required. As I mentioned, we did hear from the Chief Medical Officer earlier today, and he indicated that a task force will be established within the Department of Health to gather information, to collect information about COVID deaths within aged care services. Take a listen to what Paul Kelly had to say earlier today.
We expect there will be flu this year. We expect there will be those difficulties in the same age groups. But we have influenza immunisation. We have all of the infection control processes that protect against COVID, also protect against flu. We have treatments for COVID coming through, including oral treatments for COVID. We will have oral treatments for COVID pre-positioned or very readily available in aged care in the coming weeks, and definitely within at the time of the flu season.
An announcement would be the government saying that they're going to take serious action. Instead, what we have is a minister who says that there is no crisis and a government that says that bureaucrats are going to collect data. Well, that's the data that's out there. What are they doing about the immediate crisis which is there?
And Nor health authorities are urging people to get their boosters as they warn of another COVID wave later this year.
Yeah, health authorities are warning that there will be another wave of COVID in the winter time that is likely to overlap with a wave of flu. Now, in this update that we had earlier this afternoon from the Chief Medical Officer, Paul Kelly, he said that hospitalisations have dropped substantially in recent days, with a death rate from Omicron sitting at 0.1%. However, he is still urging Australians to go out and get their boosters. Today, 16 and 17-year-olds became eligible to receive their boosters, with ATAGI approving the Pfizer vaccine for that age group, so they can get them their booster dose 3 months after their second jab. The Chief Medical Officer says that cohort should be getting their boosters, particularly to sort of build up protection from against the transmission of COVID-19. To use his language, he said they can help build a wall against transmission because they're more likely to interact with bigger social groups and therefore spread the virus through the community. Now, here's a little bit of what Paul Kelly had to say about this upcoming or anticipated wave of COVID in winter.
I do believe that we will have another wave of Omicron in winter. I think we will have a flu wave in winter for the first time in the last since beginning of 2020. And so these are part of our preparations at the moment. To be clear, I hope I'm wrong about that. But that's the realistic expectation I have, and it's the advice I'm giving government in terms of what we need to prepare as we learn to live with COVID.
And that's the Chief Medical Officer, Paul Kelly, there, warning that there will be another wave of COVID-19, or at least that's what health authorities expect to happen during the winter. It should be noted, Ros, that earlier, just a short time ago, the opposition leader, Anthony Albanese, as we heard from him there, he was not pleased with the government's announcement of this task force for the aged care sector. There have been a lot of calls for the government to do more. The opposition wants the government to support a case that's currently before the Fair Work Commission to increase the wages of workers within the sector to address some of these workplace shortages. And today we heard from Anthony Albanese, who said that the Aged Care Services Minister, Richard Colbeck, should resign or be sacked. Yesterday he was appearing before a parliamentary inquiry and defended the level of government support provided to the sector. But Minister Colbeck has also been answering questions about why he attended cricket instead of appearing before a parliamentary inquiry into COVID-19. He holds the dual portfolios of sport and aged care services, and he says that he was doing work whilst at the test match in Hobart, but the opposition is demanding that he resign or be sacked. Ros?
No, thanks. New South Wales has recorded a further 38 deaths in its latest reporting period. Reporter Mana Zangari has more from Sydney.
Overnight in New South Wales, we recorded 12,632 new cases. That is slightly higher than yesterday's more than 11,800. Now, of today's cases, 7,147 were from rapid antigen tests, and the remaining 5,485 were from PCR test results. Like you mentioned, we also had 38 deaths overnight. That is higher than yesterday's 27 deaths. Of today's deaths, 22 were men and 16 were women. But our hospitalisation and ICU rates are continuing to go down. Currently, we have 2,578 people in hospital, which is down from yesterday's 2,622, and 160 people in ICU, which is 10 fewer than yesterday. Of those 160 people, 68 require ventilation. Now, with our vaccination rates, currently we have 95.5% of the population over the age of 16 who have had one dose, 94% have had 2 doses, and 41.7% of the population here in New South Wales have had 3 doses of a COVID vaccine.
Manas, there are reports that millions of dollars worth of PPE has been wasted. What can you tell us about that?
Well, Ros, it has been revealed that the New South Wales government has reportedly written off $775.8 million worth of PPE. Now, this includes $160 million worth of face masks, which were thrown out because they didn't meet TGA requirements. There was also $20 million worth of PPE that was faulty, and almost $38 million worth of PPE that had expired. Now, the Labor leader, Chris Minns, has spoken out about this and said that it's staggering the amount of money the government has spent on PPE that has eventually been thrown out or wasn't even considered to meet regulations in the first place. He says that this money could have been spent on health resources instead, but the government has spent so much money on PPE that was thrown out, more almost as much as we've used here in New South Wales.
Manas, thanks. 34 more people have died with COVID in Victoria, but hospital admissions continue to fall. Reporter Leanne Wong has the latest from Melbourne.
Sadly, another 34 Victorians have died due to COVID-19. The state's recorded another 12,157 new COVID-19 cases. That's a drop on yesterday's more than 14,500 infections. And we're also continuing to see those hospitalisations trend downwards, which has been slightly reassuring. There are now only 752 Victorians in hospital with COVID. That's about half of what it was during the peak of the Omicron wave, when it was hitting around 1,500 admissions. And of those patients, 82 are in intensive care and 29 are on ventilators. But it's hoped that those hospitalisations will really continue to remain steady, particularly now that students have returned back to school. As we know, last month the state called code brown across its hospitals because the healthcare system was unable to cope with the number of COVID hospitalisations we've previously seen, as well as the number of workforce shortages we've been experiencing. We've also yet to receive a confirmed date on when elective surgery in Victoria will be able to resume, meaning that those wait lists are continuing to balloon. However, today's news that 16 and 17-year-olds are now eligible to receive a booster dose if it's been 3 months since their second dose means that more than 100,000 Victorian 16 and 17-year-olds are now eligible to receive their booster. That's according to Testing Commander Jerome Weimer, who also said today that the vaccination rollout for 5 to 11-year-olds is also really forging ahead. So 5 to 11-year-olds, they only became eligible to receive a vaccine 3 weeks ago. And since then, we've seen more than 277,000 Victorian children receive their first dose. That's about 46% of all 5 to 11-year-olds in Victoria. So that's a very strong number. Overall, 41% of Victorian adults have now received a booster dose, and authorities hope that those numbers will continue to increase.
Leanne, thank you. Queensland has recorded 9 COVID deaths and more than 8,500 new infections overnight. Health authorities have released results of a survey conducted during the virus's peak on the Gold Coast, which found a staggering 9 in 10 residents had no idea they were infected. Reporter Jessica Ross joins us now from Brisbane with more. Hi there, Jessica. How was this survey carried out?
Ros, the Gold Coast Public Health Unit carried out this survey. They made a random selection of addresses and then door-knocked those homes and asked the residents if they'd be willing to take a PCR test. 260 people agreed, and the tests were carried out just as the virus was peaking on the coast. So that was January 22 and the weekend of January 29. Now, of the first group, 1 in 6 came back positive. 4 out of 5 had no symptoms, and 9 out of 10 didn't even know they were infected. And there were similar results that second weekend. And while this is a small group in comparison to the rest of the population, the Premier and the Chief Health Officer have described these results as extraordinary. It's the first time a survey like this has been carried out nationwide, and it reinforces the importance of wearing masks in public and also getting tested at the slightest symptom. It also suggests that the real case numbers are much higher than the official tallies. The Chief Health Officer now predicts that by the end of this month, at least a third of Queenslanders will have been infected with COVID-19.
9 more people have died in Queensland. Jess, can you talk us through the latest COVID numbers there?
Yes, there were 8,643 cases overnight, and sadly, as you said, 9 more deaths. Now, they were people aged over 60, 4 were in aged care, and only 1 had received a booster shot. Now, hospitalisations have dropped since yesterday. There are now down to 749 in public hospitals, with 46 patients in ICU. The Chief Health Officer says it does appear that we have reached the peak, and authorities are still preparing, though, for further waves, particularly as we head into winter, and their advice, as always, is to get vaccinated, and if you've already had 2 doses, to get boosted.
Jessica, thank you. Western Australia has recorded 19 new local cases of COVID. Confirmed infections at 3 schools have forced around 400 students and dozens of staff into isolation for 2 weeks, days into the new term. The situation has prompted calls for WA to reduce the isolation period for close contacts of cases in schools. Premier Mark McGowan says the state won't be changing its strict isolation rules for now. Fully vaccinated Australians will be able to travel to New Zealand, quarantine-free from July. TVNZ reporter Katie Bradford has more from Auckland.
Kia ora. Well, the Prime Minister had a big announcement today around this border reopening. It's been long awaited here in New Zealand and overseas. Many hundreds of thousands of Kiwis stuck around the world. In Australia, from 11:59 on February the 27th, vaccinated Kiwis in Australia will be able to come home. They won't have to go into a managed isolation facility, but they will still have to isolate for 10 days at first, and then moving gradually to 7 days. Eventually, there'll be no isolation at all. If you're in Australia and New Zealand, as you said, you won't be able to come until July at this stage. That might be brought forward earlier if things go well, if there aren't as many cases as expected. There's a number of factors the government is looking at. As I said, this has been long awaited, and the Prime Minister says we can do this now because we have 94% of the country vaccinated. Our booster rate is high. She's urging people over the next couple of weeks to go out and get boosters. We are seeing Omicron cases rise in New Zealand. We've got a gradual phased approach at the moment, which is basically meaning over the next few weeks we do predict that those cases will rise quite exponentially, and they're opening the border and aimed basically for that same time. Now, the Prime Minister says, of course, the reason Australia is our closest neighbour. There's a lot of New Zealanders there, a lot of people wanting to see friends and family, and she says it's a sign of our close relationship.
Today I'm announcing that the fully vaccinated Kiwis and other currently eligible travellers from Australia will be able to travel to New Zealand from 11:59 p.m. Sunday, 27 February. And instead of going into MIQ, will be able to self-isolate. In step 2, just 2 weeks later, fully vaccinated New Zealanders and other currently eligible travellers from the rest of the world will also be able to travel into New Zealand without going through MIQ.
So when exactly then, Katie, will New Zealand open up to the rest of the world?
Well, that's the big question, really. So from March 13th, New Zealanders around the world will be able to come home as well with those same requirements. At that point, they'll also allow more critical workers in, and that's been a real big problem here. We have those labour shortages across almost every single industry. They will allow a number of people across the board into the country then as well on relevant work visas. They'll also allow international students. That's another industry that's been hit hard by these closed borders over the past couple of weeks. And then gradually over this 5-step approach, as you heard the Prime Minister say, we will allow people come in July. People from Australia who are vaccinated can come in, and people will have to take tests, quite regular tests as well when they come in, tests on arrival and so forth. By October, the hope is that we will be fully open up to the world, and of course that will have a huge impact on our economy and on the mental health and well-being of people who've been so desperate to see friends and family and travel.
We have been here before though, haven't we, Katie? How certain can people be that these dates won't change?
And that's the problem. You have to allow people some sort of cynicism in this, because we have heard these dates before. We, of course, had that Trans-Tasman bubble, that tiny window when people were able to travel between our countries last year. The government is now saying that this is going to happen, that they aren't going to let anything change this. I guess because we've had this change in strategy in which we are now letting Omicron in, the acceptance is that it is going to be out in society. Before now, we've had that elimination strategy. There was only so long we could keep our borders closed. There's been a lot of issues around the numbers of people about not being able to get into MIQ, the struggle there's been for businesses, the problems it's created for people. The government says there is nothing that will stop this happening now. Those dates may change around those July and October dates. They hope, if anything, they will be brought forward. Of course, you have to trust people to go into isolation and stay in isolation. You have to trust those rapid antigen tests. There are a number of factors at play here. And of course, the other issue is for tourists. I'm sure there are a lot of Australians who would like to come to New Zealand. They won't be so keen to do that if they have to isolate for 10 or 7 days in a hotel somewhere, if that's the case.
Katie, thanks so much for the update. Authorities are assessing the best option to help get people out of flood-stricken Coober Pedy in South Australia's far north. Reporter Patrick Martin is in Coober Pedy with the latest on evacuation flight plans.
Welfare agencies in town say there's likely in excess of 50 stranded travellers, some of whom have been here for almost 2 weeks since the highway that connects Adelaide to Coober Pedy and indeed the top end was first flooded. Now, we understand about a dozen of those have expressed significant interest in getting out on an ADF-run evacuation flight, and some people were told yesterday to pack their bags, with that flight possibly set to leave as early as last night. That flight did not happen, but we're now told a flight is more likely to leave late this afternoon or early this evening at the very latest. And there is significant hope that that flight does go ahead, with many people here wanting to get home for all sorts of different reasons. Some people are grieving the loss of a family member, other people need to get back to work, and there are students here who haven't started their school year either. So they're very much hoping that they can get out and get back home soon. However, the other problem here is that most people are here in cars and caravans and have many of their personal belongings. So eventually, when the flooding on the Stuart Highway does recede, they are going to have to come back here and collect the rest of their stuff.
And what do we know about when the Stuart Highway will reopen, Patrick?
Yes, well, the Stuart Highway does remain underwater at Glendambo, which is about 200 kilometres south of where I am today, and it's still causing significant problems. Recent heavy rains in the APY lands has seen flights head up there to drop food to Pipliajara, which is in the far northwestern corner of South Australia, with road freight unable to come through that area. The Premier Stephen Marshall today visited Port Augusta, which was hit by a freak storm earlier in the week, and is now travelling to Glendambo to assess the damage there. Let's have a listen now to what he says is the most likely course of action for that part of the highway.
We are very keen to establish the Stuart Highway as quickly as possible. I do not have an exact time frame for you. It really does depend on what the damage to that road is. As you know, there were some people going against SAPOL, going against the SES direction to not use that piece of road. We believe that those trucks and those vehicles have caused some damage. We do not know the extent of that damage yet, and so we're very keen to be able to get in there, do that assessment and get that road repaired as quickly as possible.
So, Ros, there we go. We don't really know when this highway is going to reopen, and the Australian Defence Force says they'll continue to fly food into this part of the world for as long as it takes. And for those people that are stranded here, it's very much a wait-and-see situation.
Patrick, thank you. The defamation trial of war veteran Ben Roberts-Smith has heard that 2 elite soldiers believe the events that earned him his Victoria Cross may have been falsified. A serving member of the SAS is being cross-examined after recounting details of a 2009 mission involving Mr Roberts-Smith. Reporter Jamie McKinnell has more from Sydney.
This witness is known by the pseudonym Person 41 to protect their identity, and they've told the court that some SAS colleagues don't like Ben Robert-Smith very much. Mr Robert-Smith is suing 3 newspapers over several stories that made allegations of unlawful killings overseas, which he denies, and this witness has been called by the publisher of the newspapers as they defend the case. Now, Person 41 has mentioned 3 SAS colleagues in particular who had negative opinions of Ben Robert-Smith. He described one as a hater, another as having a deep dislike, and the third as simply not liking him. 2 of those, he believed, thought events leading up to Ben Robert-Smith's Victoria Cross, the highest military honour awarded to Australian soldiers, were falsified. And the third, he said, didn't really like him because he perceived Mr Robert-Smith as being arrogant. Now, it has to be said too, Ros, that this witness has also praised Mr Robert-Smith in some ways. Yesterday, he told the court that he believed Mr Robert-Smith was a brave soldier who could be trusted to have his back. And he's also given us some very interesting insight into this 2009 mission. It was in Afghanistan when Australian patrols were clearing a Taliban compound back in 2009. And this witness, Person 41, has told the court that he saw Ben Robert-Smith instruct another soldier to shoot an Afghan captive inside that compound, and then frog march a second Afghan captive outside the compound and shoot him in the back. Those specific allegations were put to Mr Robert-Smith last year when he had his turn in the witness box, and he denied both of those as being completely false. But it is certainly giving us a very extraordinary insight into the workings of the SAS.
And this witness, Jamie, also elaborated on why he didn't make any reports about what he saw on deployment. What were his reasons for that?
Yeah, he's told the court, Ros, that there is a so-called unwritten rule in the SAS that you go along with what happened. When he was on this deployment back in 2009, he was a relatively new operative in the SAS, and he said making a report would have been meaning that he would be perceived as someone who was not up to the task of what an SAS trooper has to do. He said it would risk even being sent back to Australia with everybody knowing that you had so-called made a dob in or dobbed someone in overseas. And he said, particularly being a new person, making waves could have meant that a career that you had worked so hard for would have been taken away straight away. So he's continuing to be cross-examined further by Ben Robert-Smith's barristers this afternoon, and then we're expecting that several other SAS operatives, either past or current, will also be on the witness list after that.
OK, Jamie, thank you. A Brisbane school has withdrawn a controversial enrolment contract which described homosexuality as a sin and forced students to identify with their birth gender. Reporter Jessica Rendell joins us now from Brisbane. Hi, Jessica. What did City Point Christian College have to say this morning?
Ros, the school's principal, Pastor Brian Mulheron, sent an email out to parents this morning apologising for the discrimination that some students might have felt as a result of that contract. He also maintains that the school does not and will not discriminate against students for their sexuality and gender identity. The letter went on to say that being gay or transgender doesn't diminish a person's humanity or dignity in God's eyes. Now, this is, of course, despite that contract initially denouncing homosexuality. It put it in the same category as bestiality and pedophilia, and also required students to identify with their birth gender if they wanted to enrol at the school or remain a student at the school. Now, that letter does, of course, go on to say that it promises to consult families next time any amendments will be made to that enrolment contract.
So just tell us about the backlash the school has been facing over the last few days over this.
Yeah, so Ros, the backlash has been pretty fierce. There was a survey online, a petition that garnered more than 150,000 signatures. A teacher resigned from the school. There were students that had pulled out of the school. Previous students also spoke out about their experiences at City Point Christian College. Some said that they were told they would burn in hell for being gay. Others said that they felt like they were being ostracised and also felt like they couldn't be themselves at the school. Now, the Human Rights Commissioner actually issued a warning to the college when that contract initially came out. And Queensland's Attorney General and Education Minister Grace both had very, very strong comments about this contract. The Education Minister actually spoke about this at the press conference this morning. Here's what she had to say.
Can I welcome that? I called for that on a number of occasions this week. And can I obviously urge, in the interests of the mental welfare of students, staff, parents and carers, and in the public interest, that they abandon these contracts and that they never resurface again.
Now, the Non-State Schools Accreditation Board were actually due to have a meeting today to discuss whether or not that contract breached a requirement that all students be treated equally. But of course, now that that has been revoked, that meeting will no longer be going ahead. Ros.
Jess, thank you. Quick look at the national weather now. Rain easing late with a possible storm for Brisbane. Possible shower developing in Sydney, partly cloudy in Canberra. Cloudy for Melbourne, a shower or two clearing in Hobart, partly cloudy in Adelaide. Very hot and sunny for Perth, and showers and a possible storm in Darwin. You can keep up to date at news.abc.net.au and on ABC iView. Here are the top stories on ABC News. Australian maritime experts have confirmed the final location of Captain James Cook's ship, the Endeavour. The wreck was found in Newport Harbour in the US state of Rhode Island after 22 years of searching. It was the first European vessel to reach Australia's east coast in 1770. It was sunk as part of the American War of Independence in 1788. The opposition is calling for Aged Care Services Minister Richard Colbeck to resign due to ongoing problems in the sector. Minister Colbeck yesterday declared the industry was performing extremely well despite the Omicron variant sweeping through aged care facilities. Providers estimate a quarter of all shifts are going unfilled and about a half of all nursing homes are battling COVID outbreaks. 16 and 17-year-olds can get their COVID vaccine booster from today. The vaccine advisory body has given the final tick of approval, so people in that age group can get a third dose of the Pfizer vaccine 3 months after their second shot. The Health Minister says he expects the definition of fully vaccinated to change to include a booster shot. And New Zealand has unveiled a plan to slowly reopen its borders to the world. It starts at the end of the month, with New Zealanders in Australia the first in line to be allowed back without going into managed quarantine. Australian tourists will be able to travel no later than July. More now on the concerns about the aged care sector, and the government says it'll set up a task force looking at COVID deaths, particularly in aged care. Professor Joseph Ibrahim is the head of Monash University's Health Law and Ageing Research Unit, and he gave evidence at the Aged Care Royal Commission.
Well, I guess it's a surprise to me that there's a task force being set up, given the Minister's comments this morning and all through the past week saying that the sector is running beautifully. I think the task force is really an indictment on the plans that have been executed by the federal government since the start of the pandemic. We would not have needed a task force if they had listened to and learned from the experiences of Newmarch and the early experiences in Victoria. I'd be fascinated to see who's going to be chairing this task force, what experts they're going to be drawing on, and what their connections are with the government and the regulator and the Department of Health. We've seen in the past that the Prime Minister in particular will cherry pick the people that he wants on committees to deliver an outcome that he finds predictable and able to be managed politically.
So you say that lessons haven't been learnt from Newmarch and other aged care facilities when this pandemic and this surge of cases first began. What were those lessons?
Well, the lessons originally was there was no plan for aged care. Aged care was really a side issue for the pandemic planners. There wasn't a national group to advise until late August in that first year, and that took enormous pressure for the Prime Minister to do that. There's been no transparency around what the activity of that group has been or how the government and the department and the regulator have been dealing with the pandemic. What we get are little tidbits from the Minister saying that everything is just going terrific and so well that I can go to a test match. And again, Minister Hunt this morning said that the sector was performing extraordinarily well when it clearly is not. We knew, Ros, from the Royal Commission that less then over half the facilities were understaffed in 2019. That situation can only have gotten worse during the pandemic. We can't see into the homes. We're not getting reports about the level or standard of care. And we get this nonsense statement that 60% of people are dying are in palliative care, as if that is okay, and no clarity that palliative care does not mean that people are at end of life. It simply means it's a phase that may take 12 or even 24 months before a person dies.
The opposition is calling on Aged Care Services Minister Richard Colbeck to resign. Do you think he should?
I think it's pointless. What's the point? It's like, to use a classic quote of shifting the deck chairs in the Titanic, this isn't the fault of one person. And that my greatest fear is that Richard Colbeck becomes a sacrificial lamb and then everyone thinks it's all right because one minister has been removed. What we need is the close and detailed review that's objective around both the Prime Minister's office, the Federal Minister of Health and Ageing, and the Department of Health and Regulator. We need their roles to be examined really closely and what's happened to better understand what to do next time so it doesn't occur. Having Richard Colbeck go is not the answer, and will be another sort of way of managing expectations with no real change.
Joseph, in your role at Monash and as a witness at the Aged Care Royal Commission, have you been contacted by workers in the sector, either current or former workers? And if so, what have they been telling you?
So I'm often contacted by families, workers, but often workers who have quit the sector because they're exhausted, fed up, and can't deal with the duplicity anymore of the public statements of government and providers about how everything is all right, when clearly it's not. They're exhausted, they're not getting the PPE they need, they're having to work double shifts, they're having to work unpaid overtime, and their hearts generally are aching for the residents who can't speak up. And this whole situation would be far more prominent in the public's mind if those 200,000 people in aged care actually had a voice that we would listen to.
Do you think we've become complacent at the number of deaths that are announced daily at aged care centres across the country?
I think we absolutely have become complacent, and we tend to think that the deaths of older people don't matter, but they truly do matter. And if anyone thinks that your life should be foreshortened because of the mistake of another person, I think that ought never happen. And we've got to be really conscious of providing people with the care that they need, and that their deaths are related to the underlying illness that they have, not because of mismanagement, either clinically or mismanagement at executive or managerial level. It's not okay for all people to die because we did something wrong.
Professor Joseph Ibrahim, thank you so much.
It's a pleasure.
Just over 250 years after Captain Cook sailed into Botany Bay, the final location of his ship, the Endeavour, has been confirmed. The shipwreck was discovered at the bottom of Newport Harbour in Rhode Island in the US some years ago, but it's taken until now to be officially identified as the famous vessel. Here's Kieran Hosty, who's Manager of Maritime Archaeology at the Australian National Maritime Museum, and he joins us from a replica of the Endeavour there at Darling Harbour. Good to see you, Kieran. So you say now that this wreck, good afternoon, is the Endeavour. What convinced you that you had the right ship?
It's taken a long time to actually figure out that we're actually dealing with Endeavour in Newport, Rhode Island. A lot of our work's based on the work of Dr. Cathy Abbas, the historian, and also our own historians here, Dr. Nigel Erskine. And using all their information they put together, we realised that the wreck was located to the north of Goat Island, within a very small area to the north of Goat Island, and there was 4 other vessels in that area that were scuttled at the same time. We looked at those vessels, we looked at a site called RI 2394, and we realised that RI 2394 was the largest of all those vessels wrecked in that particular part of Goat Island, near Goat Island. We then looked at the material we're seeing on the seafloor, comparing it to archival information that we knew about Endeavour. And we then eventually, after many years of work, realised that RI 2394 was Endeavour.
Now, the Rhode Island Marine Archaeology Project, they say your positive identification is premature. There's no indisputable evidence, and this is a breach of contract between you and them, they say. How do you answer that?
Well, I can't answer the question about a breach of contract. As far as I'm aware, our contract with the Rhode Island Marine Archaeology Project expired in November last year. But going on to the actual jumping the gun that we've actually haven't got enough information, I disagree with that. We've got a number of points about RI 2394 which correspond to what we know about Endeavour. We have information we have a length of measurement from the pump well, the midship's part of the ship, where the main mast is, to the bow of the vessel, and that exactly corresponds to what we know Endeavour had. We have ship scantlings, the size of the timbers, and those ship scantlings, those timber sizes correspond exactly to what we know about Endeavour. We have a vessel there which is built out of European, not American timbers, so we know it was a European-built vessel. We know this is one of the scuttled vessels because we have scuttling holes along the line of the keel. So we know it's an 18th century vessel, we know it was scuttled, we know it is the same size as Endeavour. We then have historical information to indicate that Endeavour, RI 2394, was the largest transport sunk in that particular area of Newport Harbour. So we tick all those boxes. So we're very open to conversations with Dr. Abbas if she disagrees with our findings. And we've actually sent our report to Dr. Abbas 10 days or so ago. So she's very well aware of where we're thinking and what we're thinking along those lines.
Kieran, how much of the vessel is left?
Approximately 10 to 15% of the hull, just the lower part of the ship, just the frames, the ribs, the lower ribs of the ship, if you like, and the area of the vessel from the bilge pumps to the bow. Unfortunately, the stern area of the vessel has degraded over time.
Have you recovered any items from it, parts of the ship or items from those who sailed on her?
Remarkably few items. We have to remember that Endeavour was a prison ship before it was scuttled, as it was known as Lord Sandwich at the time, was a prison ship at the time before it was scuttled, and prior to scuttling, many of the artefacts, many of the things like a ship's bell, were removed. So if we're looking for an intrinsic artefact that actually says Endeavour on it, the chances of finding that on a site like RI 2394 is almost non-existent.
This is, as you say, an important find in marine archaeology, but it's also a controversial announcement in many parts of Australia, isn't it, given the history of the vessel and the colonial era it ushered in?
It is. We have to remember that it's a vessel, for many Europeans, many Australians, is a vessel of exploration and discovery, but for many of our Indigenous peoples, for many of our First Nations peoples, both in Australia and in New Zealand, it is a vessel that directly led to the European colonisation of Australia. And so it's a mixed history, it's a controversial history. And when we interpret the site, we have to keep that in the back of our minds. We also have to remember that it's a controversial vessel for the Americans. The Lord Sandwich, Endeavour, brought Hessian troops, mercenary troops, to Newport and to New York to fight against Americans who are fighting for their liberty against the British. So for many Americans, this is actually a vessel of occupation as well. So it's got a very controversial history, a very controversial past.
What happens to the site now, Kieran?
That's a very good question. We have to start our discussions with the Rhode Island government in how best to protect that site. We don't want to braze the vessel in any way. We want to leave it in Newport, Rhode Island, but we do want to carry out further interpretation and educational work on the site. There's lots of ways that we can do that, either through 3D mapping or 3D reconstruction of the vessel, but we don't want to recover any further material.
Kieran Hosty from the creaking replica of the Endeavour there at Darling Harbour. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thousands of combat-ready US troops will be deployed to Eastern Europe as fears of a Russian invasion of Ukraine continue to mount. The move aims to reassure NATO allies who are worried that the Russian military build-up could spill across their own borders. Russia has described the deployment as a destructive step which reduces the chance of a political solution. North America correspondent Barbara Miller reports.
Stoking fears of war, Russian and Belarusian troops put their hardware on display. Moscow continues to deny plans to invade Ukraine, but these military manoeuvrings have prompted the US into a show of solidarity and strength.
The current situation demands that we reinforce the deterrent and defensive posture on NATO's eastern flank.
2,000 troops will deploy from the US to Poland and Germany, while 1,000 more will shift from Germany to Romania. The Pentagon says they're intended to help shield Eastern Europe from the crisis, but will not enter Ukraine.
These movements are unmistakable signals to the world that we stand ready to reassure our NATO allies and deter and defend against any aggression.
8,500 US troops are already on standby, and in the Adriatic Sea, a US warship is within striking distance if needed. As diplomacy falters, the US is shoring up its deterrence measures. At the same time, the administration has changed the language it's using around the potential threat posed by Russia, no longer describing an invasion of Ukraine as imminent.
We stopped using it because I think it sent a message that we weren't intending to send, which was that we knew that President Putin had made a decision.
Fresh from a trip to Ukraine, the British Prime Minister phoned Vladimir Putin to express deep concern about Moscow's hostile activity.
The job of the UK is to lead the West in bringing together the most important countries in creating a package of economic sanctions that will deter President Putin from what I believe would be a disastrous miscalculation.
A multi-pronged attempt to stop Russia in its tracks. Barbara Miller, ABC News, Washington.
More turtles have nested on North Queensland's Magnetic Island this summer than ever before. The bumper hatchling numbers are believed to be thanks to warmer waters brought on by the La Nina weather pattern. Here's Paul Groves from the Magnetic Island Network for Turtles. Hi there, Paul. So what sort of turtle numbers are you seeing there on Magnetic Island? Hi.
The numbers we usually get are fairly low. We sort of maybe get about 15 a year. Sometimes we only get perhaps 1 or 2. But yeah, this year we've seen between 30 and 50 nests around the island, which is really awesome. We're really excited about it.
And how many eggs are in each nest, or will be in each nest?
Yeah, well, normally we get one species predominantly, which is the Australian flatback turtle, and that usually has around about 40 or 50 eggs. But this year we actually, for the first time, have a large number of green turtle nests as well. Now, green turtles can have around 100, 120 eggs in their nests. Their hatchlings are much smaller. They produce a large number, but a lot smaller little hatchlings.
Right. Have they hatched yet?
They're still going. Most of them have hatched. We're still monitoring a few nests. It's been interesting times this year because the same as we did a couple of years ago, we've had some really hot weather this summer, and some of our hatchlings are actually cooking in the nest. So with some of the nests we're intervening, we're putting shade structures over the top, and we've got a watering regime. We've got a group of volunteers that actually go out each morning and just cool the sand out a little bit to give these developing eggs the best chance of success.
So the increased numbers, that's down to La Nina?
Yeah, that's our theory. We've been monitoring for around about 14 years in partnerships with Queensland Parks and Wildlife. And over that time, we've not seen this number of hatchlings, and we attribute that probably to the La Nina weather pattern that we're in at the moment.
So this is going to be a great boost to overall turtle numbers, isn't it?
Oh, look, I think every bit helps. There's a lot of threats facing our turtles. We also run the turtle hospital here on the island, and we've had several turtles this year that have had plastic in them that we've managed to save. Some we haven't. So every turtle out there, I think, hopefully makes a difference.
Yeah. And what is it about Magnetic Island, Paul, that attracts turtles to go there to nest?
I don't think they're attracted particularly just to here, but it is a good refuge for them. We don't have a lot of the predators that mainland Australia has, such as feral pigs, foxes and wild dogs and goannas that predate on the eggs. So apart from the warm weather, nesting turtles or the hatchlings here actually have a good chance of making it through from egg to babies.
Well, we hope the rest of those eggs hatch without any problems at all. Paul, thank you.
Cool, thank you.
Australia's flag bearer for the Beijing Winter Olympics will be announced tonight ahead of tomorrow's opening ceremony. Tracy Holmes reports from Beijing.
Well, we join you today from the main media centre, and quite a bit of the activity has already moved out because many of them have gone across to the Bird's Nest. It's the final dress rehearsal for the opening ceremony this evening, our time. But the big news, of course, is that the torch relay has begun. It's a much reduced torch relay, only 3 days in all. Now, compare that to the Summer Olympics here in 2008, where it was a 183-day torch relay, about 173,000 kilometres covered in that time. But this time, because of COVID, and you're all aware of the COVID restraints, it basically went around Beijing yesterday. It'll head up into the mountains today. It'll run straight through Zhangjiakou and the Athletes' Village, where most of the Australians are staying, and then make its way back for the opening ceremony on Friday afternoon. As far as the Australians go, the big news today that everybody's waiting for: who will carry the flag in the opening ceremony? So everybody's got their own point of view on this. Will it be Britt Cox, who's here for her 4th Olympic Games? Or will it be somebody like Matt Graham, who only weeks ago was lying on a couch trying to recover from what he described as an incident where he shoulder-charged a mogul? So all of that is to be revealed a little bit later today, early this evening, Beijing time, and a lot of frenzied activity in the meantime. We saw events get underway with the curling yesterday afternoon. That is going to continue with the mixed doubles and the Australian team there. And of course, most of the Aussies are here. Only 5 or 6 more to fly into Beijing.
Here with the rest of the sport is Daniela Intilli.
Ange Postecoglou's Celtic has moved to the top of the Scottish Premier League. Celtic beat arch-rivals Rangers 3-0 in Scotland's fabled Old Firm derby to seize top spot in the Scottish Premier League. 3 goals in the first half did the damage, including 2 from new Japanese midfielder Ryo Hataye. It's Celtic's first Old Firm derby win since 2019. In cricket, the Women's Ashes will resume today with a one-day international in Canberra today. If Australia win today, they'll retain the Ashes, while England need to win the 50-over series 3-0. The hosts are on a 26-match unbeaten streak in the format. Australian surfer and 2-time world champion Tyler Wright has reached the semi-finals of the WSL event at Pipeline in Hawaii. Joining me live from Pipeline is ABC reporter Matt Davis. Matt, good to see you again.
Yeah, great. Thanks for having me.
Matt, Tyler Wright, she's looking pretty strong heading into the semis.
Tyler's come out this morning. It was a really special day on the beach here at Pipeline with the females taking to the water in what is the first time they've competed at this famous surf break. Tyler came out swinging and has, as we said, secured a spot in the semi-finals.
And we do have Taylor speaking afterwards. Let's have a listen to her.
Overall, we've done a lot of work to be here, and it's kind of time to enjoy all that work. And honestly, no, not too much changes for me. I think it'll be conditional on what the conditions are doing and board size and stuff like that, but mostly no, it'll just be the goal's the same.
And this is a historic event for women who finally get to surf at this famous location. How did the other Australian females go?
Yeah, so the Australian contingent started, there's half a dozen in the competition at the start. Sadly today, a couple of others didn't quite get through. They were very close. And did very well. Again, it's the first time out here. It's an extraordinarily challenging surf break. I caught up with Sally Fitzgibbons, who had lost early on in the day. She was disappointed, but at the same time quite, as they say, stoked to have competed at such an iconic location.
Birthplace of surfing, and here at Pipeline, you know, I've watched countless movies, moments, even the Pioneers clips, and yeah, it just fills me with immense pride to be able to put on jersey 89 and represent my country of Australia.
Nichols.
And then further on after that, I caught up with Isabel as well today. She narrowly missed out on going in through to the semi-finals, but for her first time on the tour, the first year, it was really about what's coming in the head, how this will inspire young female surfers in the future to become future champions like Tyler, like Stephanie Gilmore, and of course the iconic Carissa Moore, the 5-time world champ and Olympic gold medalist, a Hawaiian surfer, putting it all together.
The future is bright. If this is just the start, I don't know what we're going to see later on. I think give it a couple of years and we're going to see the females charging just as much as the men. And I'm honestly so excited to be a part of that whole generational shift. And I just seriously can't wait to see it happen.
So as we head towards the weekend, there's a large swell forecast to come on in. We've got the finals of the men's and the women's here. So we'll be seeing a pipe champion being crowned this weekend. In the men's side, we've got the 50-year-old Kelly Slater, or soon to be 50 this week, surfing off against people half his age, but you never know, he pulls out the magic. And of course, on the women's side, it will be a special moment where the first pipe champion will be crowned in a women's jersey. So lots of excitement here on the North Shore of Hawaii. And hopefully tune in and check out, and let's see, maybe Tyler can take it out for here and become the inaugural champion over here.
Fingers crossed for Tyler. An amazing few days ahead. Thank you, Matthew.
Thank you.
And for more sports news and analysis, check out abc.net.au/sport.
One of the nation's most recognisable landmarks has been splashed with red. The sails of the Sydney Opera House have lit up to signify the beginning of the Lunar New Year. It marks the year of the tiger, with the colour signifying luck, prosperity and happiness. Now for check of the weather, here's Nate Byrne.
It's going to be a wild day of wet and stormy weather for large parts of Queensland's east today, with intense rainfall, widespread storms and likely many severe thunderstorm cells, all thanks to a trough moving through. It's the same trough that dumped flooding rain through central Australia, though the skies there now have cleared thanks to a high pressure system that's really helping to settle things down. Though in the west, we're keeping an eye on another trough that's pulling heat back into the southwest. Today, that's helping to ramp up the fire danger. We've got extreme conditions on again for the northern parts of the coastal central west district. Some severe fire danger around that, and total fire bans remain in force. No rainfall for the south of WA though. It's all going to be about what's happening over in the east, with Queensland already under initial flood watches for some parts of the state, particularly through the south and southeast. Still plenty of activity across the north, but good news for WA. That low that's been drenching northern parts of the state is weakening and shifting off. And good news in the east, the rain's not going to last too long. Today, a little bit of wet weather lingering into tomorrow. We've then got a frontal system that's ploughing into the southwest corner for this weekend, for late in the weekend, early next week. It's not going to bring much in terms of rainfall, but it's certainly going to help with the heat that's just continuing to climb, getting to 40 in Perth on Saturday. Then Sunday, a much cooler air mass moving in. That'll get rid of the heat and start cooling things down. For tomorrow, we're expecting more wet weather around for Brisbane with a shower or two, a top of 26, 25 in Sydney with some more wet weather there. But then after that, clear skies, 20 in Canberra, 25 for Melbourne, 20 for Hobart. Adelaide's got a top of 27 degrees. Nowhere near Perth though, very hot in the west there. 39 is the maximum on the forecast. And Darwin has some showers, maybe a storm as well, top of 31.
Staying with weather forecasts, a famous groundhog has forecast 6 more weeks of winter for the US. Each year on Groundhog Day, thousands gather in the town of Punxsutawney in Pennsylvania to witness a groundhog called Phil make his prediction. According to folklore dating back to 1887, if the rodent sees his shadow, then frigid and blustery weather will continue for 6 weeks. Well, this year, the groundhog dashed hopes of an early spring when he emerged from his tree stump and saw a shadow. That is ABC News for now. A reminder, you can keep up to date on all the latest news across all your devices at news.abc.net.au and on ABC iView. I'm Ros Childs. More on our top stories coming up on the ABC News channel. See you soon.
Tomorrow on News Breakfast, it's ready.